Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kessler and Commissioner Chopra, welcome to both of you. Thank you for your willingness to serve. You've been nominated to lead two agencies that can have a very substantial impact on the U.S. economy. After taking a devastating hit last spring, the U.S. economy is thankfully now in recovery mode. But there are any number of actions the federal government could take that would stifle this ongoing recovery. If federal agencies like the CFPB and the SEC were to impose burdensome and restrictive regulations, including, for instance, backdoor regulations by enforcement, well, that could limit consumers' access to credit, hamper job growth by limiting access to capital markets, and restrict the ability of publicly traded companies to act in the best interests of their owners, the shareholders. Any or all of these would impede economic growth. Today, I hope we're going to learn whether Mr. Gensler and Commissioner Chopra would take such actions as the heads of the SEC and the CFPB. Commissioner Chopra has been nominated to serve as director of the CFPB, and as we consider his nomination, I think it's important to remember the CFPB's history. It was created by our Democratic colleagues through the Dodd-Frank Act as arguably the most unaccountable agency in the history of the federal government. It's an agency with a single director who, until recently, even the President of the United States could not remove. That, of course, was deemed unconstitutional, and rightly so. But it's still not accountable to Congress through the appropriations process. Under President Obama, the CFPB pursued an activist, anti-business agenda that limited consumer choice, drove up the cost of credit, and hamstrung job creators through overregulation. The CFPB repeatedly engaged in overreach and abuse of its authorities. For example, it took a regulation by enforcement approach that the D.C. Circuit Court held violated the bedrock principles of due process. It routinely overstepped its jurisdiction, like investigating for-profit college accreditation, which the courts shut down. And it used public pressure tactics like to name and shame businesses, like publishing unverified consumer complaints. Now, based on Commissioner Chopra's record, I'm concerned about whether or not he'd return the CFPB to these hyperactive, often law-breaking, anti-business agency that it was under the Obama administration. And I say this because Commissioner Chopra helped set up the CFPB and then served as the agency's student loan ombudsman during the Obama administration. In that role, he was known to have a hostile relationship with many lenders and used name and shame tactics to pressure them. At the FTC, Commissioner Chopra has continued to take an aggressive anti-business stance. The Wall Street Journal editorial board has noted Commissioner Chopra, and I quote, has a record at the FTC and CFPB that suggests deep hostility to for-profit schools and other parts of the private economy, end quote. In one FTC case, 3 of his fellow commissioners publicly rebuked his dissent in a case for its, quote, disregard of facts and law and for making misleading claims and relying on fake assertions. Finally, we know that Commissioner Chopra favors unaccountable regulators with vast powers. He proposed creating one, a super agency that would regulate politicians and think tanks and nonprofits. So this raises concerns about how he would wield power at the CFPB. And I will remind my colleagues the CFPB remains led by a sole director, not accountable to Congress through the appropriation process. And as a sole director, there would be no other commissioners to potentially restrain that sole director. I hope today we'll hear some information will provide further insight into Commissioner Chopra's plans for the CFPB if he is confirmed. As for Mr. Gensler has been nominated to serve as chairman of the SEC. There's no question he has a great deal of knowledge about securities markets. The capital markets that the SEC regulates are the envy of the world and an important engine for economic growth and job creation. Facilitating capital formation will be particularly crucial to our current economic recovery. The SEC has historically administered the federal securities law on a bipartisan basis, but there are some who want the SEC to stray from its tradition of bipartisanship by using its regulatory powers to advance a liberal social and cultural agenda on issues ranging from climate change to racial inequality. Based on Mr. Gensler's record, I'm concerned that he may be inclined to use the SEC in this inappropriate manner. But security laws are not the appropriate vehicle to regulate the climate, nor to correct racial injustice, nor to intimidate companies regarding political spending. We have environmental, civil rights, and political spending laws to do that. At the CFTC, Mr. Gensler had a history of pushing the legal bounds of the agency's authority. One FTC rule on position limits was overturned in court. Another rule on cross-border swaps was viewed by critics, including international regulators, as exceeding the FTC's authority. So this raises questions about whether he will also push the legal bounds of the SEC's authorities, in particular, in an attempt to advance a liberal social agenda. I hope that today's hearing will provide further insight into Mr. Gensler's plans for the SEC if he's confirmed, and I look forward to hearing from both Commissioner Chopra and Mr. Gensler.